Hello and welcome to the Mobius Development Podcast, a real-time game development log of a senior game development project. I'm Casey. I am the engineering director on the team.
I am Amanda. I'm the art director.
And I'm Alex. I'm the producer.
And this podcast is going to serve both as a development log for us to document our process and how the problems we encounter and how we solve those problems, and as well to serve as a potential resource for other people in the same position as us to have a more kind of, this is exactly what another team doing the same things as you was dealing with at this time and the problems they were having at this time, which I would consider, if we had something like that right now, would be quite helpful.
There's a lot of mystery involved here when we're students. We don't know exactly what goes on in the senior design project until we're right in the middle of it. So personally, I hope this will be helpful.
Yeah, we get a lot of it from like hearsay. Like they'll say, we'll hear from people in it what it's about, but we'll never like get a, like, this is what happens and what's involved in the process. So Alex, do you want to kind of go over what the game is so we can kind of get into our discussion?
I'm not really sure what the best way to explain it is. Does somebody else want to give that a try?
I can give it a go. So Mobius is a 2-player game developed for the iPad in Unity. It's going to be offline multiplayer, so both players need to communicate with a non-integrated to the game system, so either Discord, a phone call, or in-person communication to solve puzzles. And the main interaction with the game is going to be point and click. There will be some likely physics-based puzzles due to, what we can do with the iPad in terms of tilting it, things like that. And it's themed around that central communication between both players, having them really communicate to get ideas across without seeing each other's screens.
I think that's a good representation of what we're trying to make. Obviously, we're still... Oh, yeah.
And I think that's going to evolve, too, as it progresses. We'll get a better... As we have more concrete development, we'll be able to explain more as to what it is. But I think with that out of the way, we can kind of dive into the events of this this first sprint. So, Alex, if you want to kind of get into the quick recap of the Scrum planning and the kind of agile stuff that you've worked on in the last week or so.
So on the production side of things, we're a little bit behind where I personally would have thought we would be 2 weeks into the project. But I think that's okay. We're still in very early pre-production on this project. We have a lot of people, and in our early meetings, we had a little bit of an issue of time. Getting everyone into the same room was a little bit difficult, especially in the first week when people are still figuring out everything. But I think we're getting more into a groove now. We've got a few tasks in the pipeline right now. We're refactoring our initial prototype that we used to pitch this game idea to the other students and to form our team initially. And we're kind of scrapping our initial art direction from that prototype. And so we've had to do a lot of pre-production work, figuring out that art direction and kind of rewriting our narrative a little bit.
On that note, Amanda, do you want to get into kind of the new narrative of the game before we kind of dive into the art direction?
Yeah, so in our original prototype, we have kept... okay. From our original prototype, we've kept some of the core aspects of the narrative. For example, one of the sentences we used to pitch the game was, "together, but alone." Very much conveying the idea that we have 2 players, they're in separate places, using the same game, but in different spaces in that game, having to communicate. So we wanted to keep that idea, but we didn't want to continue with the setting of the prototype, which was Prague, in a hotel, very Art Nouveau. The art direction was also very watercolor based, which was something that I proposed originally, but didn't pan out with the team working on art. Which is a necessary sacrifice. Sometimes these things don't happen the way you want them to. So to get back to the question, the game now takes place in a technology and math museum. We didn't originally know why the characters are there or why they go on this journey into parallel dimensions. But in the first narrative meeting, which we had a couple days ago, yesterday, we had recently decided that the two players are either exploring the museum, doing some kind of heist. That motivation is a little bit unclear, but they go in, they encounter this Mobius sculpture and break it. And breaking that sculpture is what transports them to this new realm where they need to solve these puzzles in order to get back out, repair the sculpture, and return back to reality.
A little step up from what we had before, which was that little splash screen. It's like, hey, you're in a hotel now. That's fine.
You're looking for your friend.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. It's a weird hotel.
Yeah. No. Why? Yeah, I don't know.
We also keep in mind we had 2 weeks to create the
did have 2
prototype.
weeks.
No, did we have 3 weeks?
2 weeks.
Basically 2 weeks. We had 3 weeks, one of which was set up.
Yeah. One of which was kind of figuring out the idea.
Yeah.
And the last of which was focused on how are we going to pitch this.
Yes.
So, it comes down to we
Only
had 1
week of pure development because it was how are we going to... Was realizing that, I guess me, the guy who's coming in, like, yeah, I'll join a team, that's fine. I have to now pitch this game, and now I have to direct this game, whatever that means. So I think now the bulk of what we wanted to talk about for this first recording was the big struggles with kind of determining our art direction, in that, like, there was a lot of in meetings, there was issues reaching consensus and like a lot of disparate styles that were coming together and trying to reconcile those into a direction that everybody liked. And I think the way to talk about that is to cover kind of exactly what we did first, and then kind of talk about kind of our process behind making those decisions and kind of why we came to the conclusions that we did, and why, like, kind of what had to change about our thinking in order to get that problem solved.
Yeah, in the initial meetings, it felt right to have everybody there for all those initial planning meetings, because we were making a lot of big changes, and also we needed to get everybody sort of up to speed with what we were doing. But definitely moving forward, I think we're going to have more meetings with less people. So the individual workload for every person would be the same, but each meeting can be a lot more streamlined because it's just the people that are motivated about that specific part of the project.
For example, the art direction meeting that we had yesterday, we met for about 2 hours, about an hour and a half of which was spent actively just discussing the art direction. We had 3 people. One person came in for a little bit and then dipped out. But I think that was really, really productive. And when we returned to talking about the art direction, since we might be, rewinding a little bit for now, I think that having a smaller group making decisions is really useful for getting those decisions done in a timely manner. Do you want to talk about what the first things we did in our early meetings were?
Yeah, kind of specifically in the fold of our art direction, just kind of what those first meetings were like, because it was a lot of like throwing disparate ideas out there. That first mood board was kind of a mess. It was a lot of.
I was thinking we could even rewind a little further for a second.
Yeah, back into the bygone era of 2 weeks ago.
Oh yeah,
when definitely. In our very first.
I don't even remember what happened 2 weeks ago.
In our very first meeting, in which the first thing we did was
scrap everything.
Which was scary to me as the producer, but I think in the end that was an important step. Like, I think if we had locked ourselves into that initial prototype plan, we probably would be in a worse spot going forward. So I think that was important. It's obviously not something you can do in every 2 weeks.
No, that wasn't the plan. We weren't going to be like, all right, it's the start of the second sprint. Let's scrap everything, do it again.
Let's scrap everything. We're going to start over. That's what sprints are. We get 2 weeks to make the game, and we just try different ways.
Yeah.
No, probably not. Probably not that.
But we had an organized method for scrapping aspects of our game. We knew there were important parts of the game. There were core aspects of what made Mobius the game. So we drew up a little chart on the whiteboard. It had a keep section, it had a scrap section, and it had a question mark section. So through the group discussion, we went through our design document from the prototype, and we said, are we keeping this? Are we scrapping this? Do we not know about this yet?
And then a lot of stuff went into do we not know, and then that went to like going through that do we not know list and saying, what if this stuff is really worth keeping? Because a lot of it was like, I liked this element of the prototype, not I think this element of the prototype is what makes the game we want to make. So a lot of it was the setting went and the art direction went and like even kind of core aspects of the puzzle design went, and the only thing that really kind of maintained was that aspect of when you finish a broad puzzle, that reality that you're in resets itself with minor changes, and that was the only thing that was really retained in our design, and that was probably the best outcome of that meeting, because even like elements that were kind of central to the pitch, like the cosmic horror aspect, went when we made those decisions.
Yeah, I think that there's a important step where you sort of get over the hump of that like honeymoon period with your pitch and your idea, and you realize that maybe this isn't the best way once you've actually assembled your team, because the team assembly process has a real big impact on what you're actually going to want to be doing.
Yeah, that was the other big surprise too, is that when like a lot of those pitches were like, we're gonna allow team sizes smaller than 8, where we went from like, oh, we have 9 people, we're gonna be on the smaller side of teams, to Nathan made that announcement, and it's like, oh, now we're suddenly like the 7th biggest team.
I think we are maybe the 5th biggest.
Are we the 5th biggest?
I think there's 2 or 3 teams that have 12 people, and I don't know other than that, but I think we're in the top 5 with 9.
Definitely an interesting chart of lots of 5-people teams, us, and then lots of 12 to
teams.
12 plus.
Because my first reaction to that was like, oh, now we're like on that list of the big teams. There's expectations involved in that, and I was like, I don't know if I want like the weight of, oh, this team had 9 people this whole time. It was a popular idea. If like I think it was Gigi that was talking about it in the lecture, that it was the kind of the previous kind of air of the program was very much like these bigger games, or the games with bigger teams fundamentally made games that were more impressive than the games with smaller teams, so that there's this just like expectation that because you have suddenly we had this bigger team, that our game had to be like one of the most impressive games to come out of the program this year. And I think that's overall not kind of the case. That I think that perception has shifted, but it definitely was in that first moment a stressor that was like, okay, now that we have this bigger team, we really have to deliver.
As the art director, this is also intimidating to me. I think that most of the people on our team have their foot in the art realm. We do have an art-heavy game, seeing as there are a number of locations and puzzle objects and things like that need to get created. It is kind of hard to lead a team of, I think there's 5 people, 6 people doing art on this team. Maybe it's 5. But that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people to lead through a meeting. That's a lot of people to get on the same page about what the art is supposed to look like.
Yeah. I think it's 5 people dedicated to art. Then it's puzzle art, programming art. 4 people dedicated to art, puzzle art, programming art, VFX, and art. And then the 2 programmers that maybe we can draw a stick figure sometimes, or put an existing PNG through the oil paint filter on Photoshop.
We also have a member who's doing art and is leading the narrative meetings.
Yes.
So,
oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of people wearing a lot of hats.
Well, none of our programmers are pure programming, because our 3 programmers are programmer art, programmer sound, programmer production. So
everyone is wearing at least 2 hats.
Yeah, and that brings up another interesting point, which is that because our team in particular has such a small tech division and such a small technical demand, it's interesting the way that it fits in with the other teams, like the 12-people teams with 3 artists and like 8 or 9 programmers. So it's interesting.
Or like the Game Boy Advance team that is all programmers.
Yeah.
Because that was the appeal of that pitch for people. So I think that's kind of, it's the balance there. And I want to say that we don't have high technical demand, because even looking at kind of the early puzzles in the pipeline, like there's technical demand in how we want to like store the information in that vending machine efficiently, and how we want the back end of all of our puzzles to go in the most efficient way. We can use some more advanced techniques than just like storing everything in arrays.
I think that's fair. But we definitely, I guess the point that I was trying to make is we definitely have a much larger art scope than tech scope, which is different from a lot of games like that have a very large text scope and then only one 3D modeler.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting.
I think a lot of those teams, though, will be... Because even the 12-person teams, I think we're one of the few teams that isn't, at least right now, considering the use of external collaborators. I think a lot of those teams are bolstering their arts division with external collaborators, and we're not doing that. So we kind of have a very core team of everybody on the team is in the program, and we're not, like, outsourcing a lot of our work like some of the other teams are to get that even division, because I don't think, at least right now, we're in the position where we would have to do that.
Mm-hmm. And having such a large art team, I think, and such a focus on art and a large art scope does mean that it is all the more important to do what we're doing right now, which is, several weeks of pre-production and focusing on our art direction and getting everyone on the same page about what the art is going to look like and feel like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And on that art, let's pull back from this tangent that we've gone on about kind of like prior stuff, which I think is important to get out into the world and document it as well. But I think we need to return to what happened with... How did we go from our big mess of a mood board that we talked about on, Monday? Mm-hmm. To the nice, clean mood board that we have as a result of our meetings yesterday?
Yeah, so that process was a bit of a mystery to me to begin with. I really leaned on feedback from our arts professor in that process. Not necessarily feedback, but his lectures about art direction.
Do we want to name drop him?
I don't know.
Do we want to... what's his Twitter?
Hello, yes, we're at the University of California, Santa Cruz. My address is...
Oh, no.
No, I was saying just, do you want to name drop Marcelo's Twitter?
I think that we can use his first name if
he
we
has
want.
a private Instagram.
Do you follow that private Instagram?
No, Janelle does. So it popped up in my Instagram, and I was like,
does he
click
mention,
follow, and it was like, this is private.
Does he mention Pink a lot? Does he call her out for Pink a lot?
Does that in lecture, if nothing else.
I get a chuckle every time.
Me too. And I think so does Janelle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't think he'd do it if she didn't.
Yeah. No, they are friends as far as I can tell. But so our professor is a graphic designer by profession, as far as I am aware. He's also got a lot of experience in 3D modeling and, other cool art things. So his first couple lectures this quarter have been about what is an art direction? How do you do an art direction? And that has been really important to me as the art director. Coming into this quarter, I knew our art direction was changing because personally I wasn't happy with the prototype's art and look and feel, and I knew other people on the team weren't as well. So having some guidance from the professor really helped. We also had our first team check-in with this arts-focused professor. And he gave us some really good ideas. So originally what we had done is had everyone on the team bring in some mood board images. That means images that were inspiring to them and what they thought this game's direction could take. We had a lot of really different images, from a vector art to multimedia, things that combine traditional animation and video. We had a lot of photographs of heavily lit museum displays. There was really cool typography that people put in. So we had this huge mood board, and it just didn't have any connecting thread between all of them. Our first attempt at glancing through it and having everyone talk about the images they brought was a little bit messy. Like, people had a lot of different ideas that weren't really being consolidated. So
yeah. There was a lot of attachment to a lot of those images as well.
Yes.
So people were like, what I found was this is what I want it to look like. And there were some threads that we could find there. Like that first meeting, there were some levels of agreement on what we kind of wanted it to look like. But I think those only really spread to maybe 3 people at a time in a 9-person meeting. So like leaving that, it was like, okay, we need to really consolidate what we're doing here. And that was like the big concern out of that was, and I think this gets into the other point on my notes for Dave. When we make that decision, are we making that decision about what's best for the game, or are we making that decision about trying to please the most members of the team with what they want to do? And I personally don't think either one of those is the correct answer, but I think we were leaning way too far to one side of that spectrum.
Yeah, as the art director, I was definitely afraid that if I made a hard art direction decision, that there would be people on the team that didn't like it, that wouldn't want to work with it, that would refuse to, make concessions to what they like to draw and how they like to draw. So I was definitely holding on to that fear. What really helped moving forward from this first iteration of the mood board is our professor suggested that all the artists bring in a new piece of art with a one-day turnaround that was their idea of the style and showed what they could do, what their strengths were, what their art style was, and what they could see for this game. So I said that is an excellent idea, and we did that. We wound up having 3 people, myself included, that brought in art. No, we had 4 people. Sorry.
Yeah.
That brought
the 4
in.
that managed to attend.
No, one of the people who did not manage to attend still.
Oh, right. Was it? Never mind. I was trying to remember who it was.
I think you know who it is.
Yeah.
Who contributed art to our discussion about what the mood board will be, or what the art direction will be. Sorry, for the quote-unquote finalized mood board. So I had the 4 people that came to the art direction meeting and go around, talk about what their art piece that they brought in was, why they wanted to take the art in that direction, and once we had gone around, I also led the discussion to say, what is the connecting threads between our pieces of art, and how can our art connect to the themes and narrative of the game? And it was really productive discussion. It took a long time, as stated, an hour and a half is still a long time.
We were just sitting over there noodling through that technical design document and just looking up every once in a while and going, wow, they're getting into it in a way that like we haven't seen in the other meetings that we had this quarter. We saw it, I recall seeing it a couple times in the early prototyping phase last quarter, but in the meetings this quarter, because they were all very kind of like go around the circle meetings, there was no like huddled discussions or any like actual like we never like did more than just kind of scratch at the surface of what we were doing. I think that was kind of a fundamental flaw in our earlier discussions, that we stayed too surface level with our decision making. We didn't start to kind of dig deep into one particular thing and find something that everybody would appreciate within it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the problems with the big 9 people meetings, is that we don't have enough time or just not enough time to hear out everybody's opinions on everything that we do. And so those big meetings could really only be utilized for the big sweeping strokes to make sure everybody's on the same page of what we're making.
Yeah, that didn't stop some people from trying to dig in, and I feel like it's a fault of us. Maybe we should have followed some of those threads, or maybe we should have maybe shut that down a little earlier, just so that we could kind of keep everyone on the same page. I'm not 100%, even with hindsight right now, in whether either decision on that spectrum would have been justified.
Yeah, I think that our general meeting structure is going to be changing a lot, especially in this next upcoming 2-week sprint, going into our first playable prototype.
The art direction meeting wound up being, as Casey said, much of a huddle. It was really a discussion between the 3 people who had brought in art. The 4th person who came decided to work on puzzle design during that meeting, after, sitting in a little bit. But I think it was really productive because we were able to have those really deep discussions. We had enough time allocated for it, and everyone was able to voice their opinions. And the people who didn't attend that meeting, we curated a very tight mood board in order to show and communicate the rest of the team what we are doing now, which still needs further refinement. As art director, I think there's still some things that need definition.
Yeah, but that major decision has been made.
Yes, the major decision has been made, and we know the general look and feel of the game now, and I mean, I'm very happy with it. It definitely touches on what I had in mind from the very beginning of the prototype when I was saying, let's do watercolors. We're not totally
a different
losing.
take on that kind of like a style you don't see in games a lot.
We're definitely not losing some of the things I love about watercolor style, the texture, the colors, all of those elements. We're able to carry forward the important aspects of that, as well as bring in new thing like some examples of line variation that we really want to include, a lot of focus on shape language, having simple shapes that convey a lot of information, So I'm really excited about it, and our next step with that is going to be having the artists try that style, bring it into the first art critique session, which is happening this weekend, and further refine the art depending on what people can do and what people are excited about.
Yeah, I think that's probably the ideal place we should be right now, based on just kind of how people have been talking. Because the big talk in a lot of the lectures too is that they're very kind of retooling the expectation of this series of courses. It's not like in the past where maybe it was always like this, and the people we talked to were the ones that were like, no, we're making a whole game in this thing, when it's not. I think maybe the demo vertical and the playable slices might be new, but it seems to me like with that risk, I'm looking at like, because Alex, you'd said at the beginning that you felt we were behind schedule from where you wanted to be. Mm-hmm. My interpretation of kind of how the lectures have been going is that we might actually be even a little bit ahead, because we have a lot of pre-production decisions. I'm not saying that we're like at the end of pre-production now, but we have a lot of stuff like maybe we have a game that like can continue to have some elements of pre-production occur simultaneously with the beginning elements of like a production cycle, so we can start kind of to produce finalized elements of the game for release kind of sooner than a lot of the other ones, because a lot of the other games they have to test and refine their gameplay loop more, and it's a lot of like maybe that final that we have that core loop kind of already tested, not to say that it doesn't need more testing, of course, but mm-hmm. that it's kind of it's more tangible, we can describe it more, so a lot of kind of like we can make those more advanced decisions a little more easily, and instead we're kind of getting bogged down with maybe because other teams might not have had the art direction problem, but they have their core loop is still in its infancy and needs more design and testing, whereas we had the benefit of our core loop from that first prototype was the one thing that we were like, yes, this is what we want to keep, and thus it allowed us to get bogged down in the art direction problem without falling like too behind schedule, to the point where I would again kind of argue that we might even be ahead of schedule.
I think that's a fair thing to say. I mean, obviously, like I said, I'm the producer. I'm always going to want us to be hitting the bullet points faster.
Yeah.
As sort of my role as the producer / production manager in this small team environment, to sort of keep everybody like, oh, hey, remember those deadlines? They exist. But yeah, definitely like in our most recent lecture on the tech side, they mentioned that this entire 3-month quarter is meant to represent pre-production phase of like a AAA or equivalent game, and I think that was an interesting sort of put things into perspective.
Yeah, I quite like that too, because a lot of the discussion that we'd heard in the past is that it was like the first quarter, last 2 weeks of the first quarter is pre-production, this winter quarter is production, and the spring is post-production, and that's kind of how our original planning elements went.
Something I think really interesting that I heard from teams in the past. Last year I had a couple friends who were seniors, and from talking to them last year, it really sounded like games that started with a Block 2 prototype from fall, some teams that already had a demo that was playable, were the teams that were most successful in the long run, that were not starting from scratch at the beginning of winter quarter.
I think Nathan said something to that effect as well. That's why I was really kind of gung-ho about the pitching process once we had a really solid playable demo, because I was just going, well, in the past, not to say that it couldn't all explode for us, but in the past, having these kind of solid initial loops in a testable state earlier is almost always better. And kind of to follow, Alex, what you were saying, to go back to that, I very much like the change to pre-production in the winter and production in the spring, because that feels more real to industry, because a lot of it is still accelerated to how industry work is, but I feel like kind of the big thing to like when you apply for a position and you have portfolio pieces and this degree, as opposed to just portfolio pieces and like a computer science degree or just some art school degree, is that knowledge of this degree shows that you have experience in the team production process as well as the actual development skills. So you have that quote unquote real world experience, as opposed to just having like, oh, I made this game by myself, or I have all of these art pieces, or I have this sound library. But you also have this design experience, and you also have this prototyping experience, and you also have this production experience that people that don't have this particular degree just don't have.
I think that's a good point. So now that we've taken a look back at what we've done during this first sprint, do you want to have a little quick discussion about what we're looking at for this upcoming sprint going into our first playable?
Yeah, I think I also have in my notes the discussion kind of around when we talked about kind of making decisions for the value of the game rather than like fear. I think we touched on that a little bit.
We did touch on that a little bit, and
but,
we can, dive into it before we move forward.
I'd like to dive into that a little bit before we move forward into the what's next territory.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I definitely have some thoughts there. In terms of art direction, I really was interested in a mixed media art style. I was the person bringing in, hand-drawn animation juxtaposed on video backgrounds and saying, wouldn't it be cool if our game looked like this? And, understandably, I was quickly confronted with the fact that that is probably not in scope for, a game project that is essentially 4 months long. But our professor also drove home to us that we shouldn't be making decisions based on fear. So even though we aren't pushing as far into that mixed media direction as I was proposing at the beginning of the mood board process in these past 2 weeks, we're still moving in that direction, which is really exciting for me. I think that we're still pushing some boundaries. We're not letting fear of, how will everyone like this? How will everyone be able to produce this? Do we have the time? We're not letting those fears completely overtake us. Obviously, scope is still a consideration. But we are still moving in the direction that we want to be going and doing something that I think is going to look really unique when it's complete.
Yeah, that was the break point that we had in our discussion a few days ago. That was like kind of balancing what we want to do with what we can do, and then but not letting that be our only decision, like the only thing influencing the decision that we make. That the most important element in a decision like that is the vision of what that final game will look like. And the other speed bump that I think we had with that decision making process too was, I forget who said it the other day, but it was making a game decision in the same vein of don't make a decision out of fear, don't make a decision as HR. Mm-hmm. Which is a lot of like our direction decisions were hamstrung by we want to make a decision that everyone will like, rather than let's get a small group, which is what ended up happening, getting a small group consensus, and then like that small group can kind of onboard the rest of the team into wider consensus, so they can be like, we'll make this concession here or this concession here, but this is the style that we're going for. And I think that kind of as a decision-making process was probably the way to go, as opposed to something like, well, let's shelf this because this one person doesn't like it, or let's shelf this because these two people don't like it, or let's shelf this because that's not in this person's art style. I think the decision of let's look at a style that we like and that we want, this is in our vision for the game, and then how can we adapt the styles of our artists to that vision, rather than making a decision that was adapting our vision to their styles.
Yeah, and I think that gets into our overall philosophy when it comes to team composition, because one of the things that we were sort of encouraged to do very lightly by our technical professors was to designate one person as like, this is the decision-making person who if we're like a little bit don't know what's going on here, that's the person who would just say, okay, we're doing this, so that things could move forward. And we were hesitant to just assign somebody to that role. So I think that
from that, the making a decision from HR perspective, that people would resent the person who made that role or who made that decision in some way.
Yeah, because there's this interesting dynamic associated with this class, which is that we're all peers, we're all students at the same level in our career. So it's difficult to assign a lot of authority to each other. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting issue that we're still sort of like working through, this difference between developing as students versus developing as a professional team.
Yeah, and I think that makes it important. But I think there is authority on teams, but it's like fiat authority.
Mm-hmm.
Like the three of us have authority on the team, mostly because we've opted to make some of those decisions, and people have said that our decisions have this intrinsic value to them, not because like we have any more additional experience. But it could be just a personality thing too, that people like us, we were more willing to make those decisions, and then other people were willing to fall in line behind them.
I definitely think that personality plays into it, because if you are prepared to make a decision and be a quote-unquote leader, whether or not you're leading your peers or leading a team of professionals that you've hired, people will look to you as you said, I'm comfortable to make this decision, and you guys can, be angry at me for it. And that was, speaking from my own experience, I was able to do that to some extent, but not to others. I definitely have that fear of my teammates or my team, quote unquote, the art team, my quote unquote team, resenting me for saying this is what we're doing, and I don't care if you don't like it, because I do care if you like it or not. But on the other hand, I have a lot of experience with leadership in other areas of my life, and I am relatively comfortable making a decision and saying, this is the decision.
Yeah, I think a lot of that too is like when you look at it from far away, that like when you say we're going to make this decision, that's what we're going to settle on. If someone chooses to resent you from that decision or for that decision, that reflects, I believe, more on them than it reflects on you, because I think what they maybe don't consider when they're when they have a negative opinion of that decision is that the person who made it probably agonized a lot over the fact that maybe not everyone would like that decision, and they're just opting because it wasn't the exact decision that they wanted. They're going to shut down. Like, no, I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult thing to, like, not everybody has this sort of like bird's eye view of this project as a complete block. They're more thinking of the week to week. What are we doing? What are our tasks? And it's more difficult from that perspective to see why these decisions, these like difficult and more final decisions, need to be made. And even if they're not final, because everything that we've decided so far could be changed, but we need something in place, something written down, so that when we're designing new things, we know how they fit into this overall puzzle. And it's just difficult to recognize that if we make a big decision, it's like we needed that decision in order to move forward, and it could still be changed, but we need something in place if we're going to be building on top of it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a lot of the value of wide reflection at the end of sprints like this, is that, like, because I know there's like an assigned sprint retrospective, but that's just like, it's written down and in like to fulfill assignment criteria. I think actually like sitting and like having a full discussion and a retrospective on what we've done and why we did it is good to inform development going forward. And I think that at least, maybe not if everyone's involved in making it, if maybe at least people like listen to it, and this is kind of maybe where we shell out, like lay bare our souls for the justifications of all the decisions that we made. Maybe that would give kind of a better, wider team perspective over what exactly we're doing. Or I could just be like talking out of my ass. I don't know. I think with that though, we can probably pull into what kind of the general production plan is for the upcoming week, and then obviously we will discuss in the next recording how that went. But I think, Alex, if you want to go over kind of what the scope is for the next 2 weeks, now would be the time to do it.
Yeah, so we're about 2 days off from when we're going to be planning out all of the tasks that we're going to want to get done for our next 2-week sprint. And the interesting thing about this next 2-week sprint is that at the end of it, we need to have a playable demo with probably at least one puzzle for our personal project, so that a player could interact with it, get that full experience of interacting with it and solving it. So we're really going to be focusing on that and making sure we have at least one thing that is interactable and solvable, and that really shows our aesthetic goal of communication. And so On the technical side, what that means is really solidifying our base from our prototype and then implementing whatever puzzle is being designed by our puzzle lead. And then on the art side, we don't need any finalized assets of any kind for this particular build. So it's probably still going to be a lot of art direction talk, a lot of sketches and concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I think it would be nice to have maybe not finalized, but like in the pipeline assets in the demo, because we want to. That demo will be play tested probably a lot, because I think Michael said that there would be some kind of faculty planned playtest fair at the end of that sprint. So I think having some of those assets, at least in production, would be nice, so that we can get feedback on the look and feel as well.
I'm definitely planning on moving the art in that direction. I plan for us to spend a little more time concepting and critiquing the concepts, and then moving on saying, what do we need in this demo? What do we need on the screen? And starting to work on that. As Alex said, they probably won't be done by the time we get to the demo, seeing as more time needs to be spent on concepting, but there will definitely be assets in the game for that demo that get towards our art direction. At least that's my hope.
I think that's probably more ambitious than what I would personally say, but if you can do it, do it. Like,
well,
I'm not going to
think
stop you.
Aim for the stars, right?
Yeah.
Or aim for the moon. What is it? Aim for the moon and land among the stars. I think that's what I'm thinking of.
Let's go with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
So I guess I'll peel back. I'll say, maybe don't expect as completed assets as I may have just implied, but here's to hoping. We can try.
More than nothing, less than something.
Yeah, there we go. That's a good way to say it.
All right. And then we'd probably want a little bit of sound in there. We do have some temp sound assets already that are just...
I think in terms of SFX, that's probably... We'll still be at temp sound in that regard.
Mm.
I think that after probably a few days into that sprint, once the concepting is a little more there, I could take a look at that, just to kind of sit and look at that concept art and go, all right, what does this space sound like? What is this space going to how does it resonate? What sounds are we going to hear in it? Would there be like levels of ambience? Will it be eerie silence, ambient background noise, like music or no music? How does that factor into things? Mm-hmm. But I think that's kind of hamstrung by, I don't want to make a bunch of sonic decisions when potentially there could still be a somewhat major shift in look that then renders a lot of those sonic decisions useless.
Yeah, I think just having some kind of if not having any actual recorded studio audio for the game, because I don't think we'll have that for this demo, just having, similar to how we have an art mood board, maybe a sound mood board and a general sound design document that has sort of like what you were saying, like how does the space resonate and what sort of direction are we going?
Yeah,
I think the general sound.
I think that probably, as the one sound person, I feel totally comfortable making those decisions. I think maybe in that first week we might want to say one of our small group meetings is we get a couple people, maybe you and maybe one or two other people, and we go, let's sit together. Let me run a meeting with a few people and go, let's kind of collectively make some sound decisions, so that I'm not like just showing up at the next meeting and presenting my sounds as like the word of God.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Sort of like a critique, like what will be happening on the art side, like a sound, a listening critique of the sound direction. And then the final thing would probably be 2 narrative meetings in this next sprint, just to more solidify the beginning, middle, and end, and the arc that we're trying to go, like the emotional arc of the game.
And whether we want to kind of keep that arc contained to the demo, or whether we want to maybe do what Marcelo said and have the demo be like a representative chunk of that arc,
mm-hmm.
and not the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
From having gone to the first narrative meeting, I think we have a solid ending and the beginnings of a beginning, and whether or not we decide to present a chunk of this narrative or the entire narrative in the game, I think we have a lot of variability in what we can do. We have a beginning, we have an end, and the middle can either collapse or expand depending on what we decide to do.
I think that's probably a decision that we want to have made by the end of this next sprint.
Definitely.
But it's obviously not one that we have made now.
No, not yet.
Yeah.
But I think there is the potential to go both ways with it, so I'm happy with that.
Yeah, obviously this next sprint is still pretty heavily pre-production focused. We've got a lot of documents that we're going to want to keep updating. We've got a technical design document, game design document. We've got a narrative document. We've got our mood board, which probably will have a couple more iterations.
We'll have the beginnings of a sound document.
We'll have a little bit of a sound document. So,
yeah. And then just unlike this sprint, we will have something to show for our work, beyond a Google folder full of documents.
That's not nothing.
At what is essentially the end of the month.
Yeah, and hopefully we can keep our morale up during this document-heavy part of the project.
Hopefully we can, yes. I'm looking into ways to keep that morale up. I will probably, once you finally make that event coordination chat channel in the team Discord, I will kind of throw out my preliminary, planned out schedule for that team builder at the Exploratorium. I think that probably would do well to keep morale up. Next weekend would be great just because it's in the middle of the sprint. It's a nice okay, you've done a lot of work in this 1 week. Let's go have some fun for a day, and then come back revitalized to do more work to kind of bring this project sliding into first base.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and we'll have updates on how on fire we are or not how on fire we are in a couple weeks in our next episode.
Hoping we're only moderately on fire.
Only moderately on fire.
If an episode comes out, then you will know that we are at least only moderately on fire.
Yes, if we're completely on fire, this might not be the highest priority thing in our production pipeline.
So you imagine it could be one of the first things to go.
Well, I think it might be one of the things where it's we look at things to cut and we go, I think we need this to just as a reflection point. Because if we're horrendously on fire as it comes into when we would want to record this next one, then we can just go and say, let's discuss why we're on fire and how we can solve those issues of being on fire.
Yeah,
because
it might just be the best thing that we need is
yes.
Let's talk about what just happened.
Let's talk about what just happened. Well, because we said at the beginning, for this to be a valuable resource to other future teams, we are extremely on fire episode, and how we're coping with those problems is probably one of the most valuable kind of resources to someone who's in that same position.
Yeah, this definitely isn't just the best bits podcast. This is warts and all development process.
We might cut a best bits, but it would be a best bits of recording. So would be where our memes come out. But I think if there's not anything else the two of you want to put in, I think that's probably a good place to.
Yeah, I think that's a good sign off.
To sign off for this week. This has been the Mobius Development Podcast. I'm Casey.
I'm Amanda.
And I'm Alex.
All right. Thank you for listening.